Hey, how's it going? If you're new here, I'm Chris. I've been in the IT field for over 20 years. And today I'm going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be setting up a Fedora CoreOS server from scratch. And instead of creating the SSH keys manually, we're going to be using the Bitwarden Flatpak app. And that's going to help us create the SSH key and manage them properly. Let's look at the screen share. It's going to give us an overview of what we're going to work on together today. So we've got our Fedora CoreOS setup overview. From your host PC to running a CoreOS server. So we've got our host PC on the left, CoreOS server on the right. We're going to start on this left side. You've got your host PC, and that's the endpoint we're going to do everything from. The CoreOS server could be an old laptop or a test VM. I'll be using a test VM in the video for demonstration purposes. So step one, we're going to generate our SSH keys. And like I said, we're going to use the Bitwarden Flatpak app to do that. Once we've got our SSH key, we're going to create our Butane YAML file. And that file is just plain text. It's going to define the user, our SSH key, and any services that you want to include. For this video, I'm going to keep everything very basic and simple. Once you know what you're doing and you've got your CoreOS server up and running, you can come back and modify your butane file to include more services. Once we've got our butane file created, we're going to convert it to an ignition file, and we're going to use the CLI tool to do that. Once we've got our ignition file, we're going to set up a temporary web host to serve up the ignition file to the installer, and I'll walk you through that. Once the install completes, we'll have our CoreOS server up and running. And CoreOS is a headless server, so there's no GUI. So I'll show you how to set up SSH to connect to it. And CoreOS utilizes Podman. It's Red Hat's version of Docker. And in the example, I'm going to show you how to set up AdGuard, but you could also spin up a Minecraft server, a web server, etc. Literally anything you want. And they'll be running just as separate containers within your CoreOS install. And that's just a bird's eye view of what we're going to be working on today. Let me know down below in the comments if this is helpful. Before we get into the SSH side of things, let's talk about the Bitwarden Password Manager. The free version is solid with unlimited passwords on unlimited devices, with no catch. It's cloud-based and cross-platform too, so whether you're on your phone, your browser, or a desktop app, your vault's always with you. Security-wise, everything in your vault is zero knowledge and end-to-end encrypted, so not even Bitwarden can see what's in there. And day-to-day, it just makes life easier, generating and auto-filling strong, unique passwords for every single account instead of reusing the same one everywhere. We've all done it. If you need more, premium's $1.65 a month, and the family plans cover up to 6 people for $3.99 a month. If you're running a team, they've got free trials for the teams and enterprise plans too. Now here's a feature that a lot of people don't know about. Bitwarden can also generate and manage SSH keys. Normally we go into the terminal and we do an SSH keygen-t ed25519-f, and then we navigate into home.ssh id_ed25519. When we press enter on this, it's going to ask for a passphrase. You enter it again just to confirm, and that's going to generate your key, and they're going to live under this .ssh folder. And this public, you'd go into kwrite and you'd copy this, and that's what you're going to put into your butane file. But we're not going to do that today. Go back out here and delete that. And I'll go ahead and close the terminal. We're going to be using Bitwarden, the SSH key vault, which you can see I've got the CoreOS VM. I've already created it, but we'll run through that together real quick. We're just going to do new and then go to SSH key, and we can name this CoreOS. And there's our private key and public key. Go ahead and save it, and you can see it generated a new one for us. So all I need to do is go to this copy button, and not the private key, we want the public key, and that's going to put that into our clipboard. And now I'll go back into, and I've just created a CoreOS directory inside downloads. So what we want to do is just right click, create new, do an empty file. We're going to name this CoreOS.bu for butane. I'll put a link of this in the description, but you can see 1.7.0 is the latest. So this is what we'll reference in our butane file. And I don't have this published yet, but I will when the video goes live. We've got our variant Fedora CoreOS. The version is 1.7.0, which we got from that website. So now I'm going to switch back over to our CoreOS butane file and just paste that in. And then we'll pull Bitwarden back up, and I want this CoreOS public key. And I'm going to come in here, and I'm just going to paste over the top of that. Save that out. All right, now we want to create our ignition file from our butane file. So I'm just going to pull up the terminal again, and we want to navigate into our downloads. And then I've got the CoreOS folder. So I'm going to go in there, I'll list just to make sure I'm in the right one. So this is our target here, the CoreOS.butane file. I'm just going to right click and paste. What we're going to do here is we're going to pull down the latest and greatest butane using Podman, and we're pointing to the CoreOS.bu file that's in our downloads folder. This is important here. If you're typing this in manually, you'll want to do a bracket space file name space closing bracket and then specify your ignition. Let me make this a little bigger so you can see that that's IGN for ignition. I'm going to press enter on that. That pulled down the butane container and executed against our file for us and created the ignition file. So if we go back into our folder, we can see now we've got the ignition file here. All right, and you can see that our ignition file did create successfully. So we can close out of that. So now we've created our butane file. We've created our ignition file from the butane file. Now we're ready to go ahead and boot up the CoreOS. To demonstrate that, I'm going to use QEMU. Go to System, Virtual Machine Manager. I had to layer this in, so if you don't have that, I'll leave instructions how to do this in the description. Now that we have virt-manager open, I'm just going to do a new virtual machine. Point it to local ISO. Browse local. And in my downloads, I've got the CoreOS ISO downloaded. Open that. And we want the stable. Yeah, we'll do 8192 just so we can mimic the hardware. And then go ahead and bump it up to 40 gigs just in case we decide to download something else. Probably won't, but why not? Fedora CoreOS stable, that's fine. We'll do a custom. I always like to do this and go in and do it UEFI, and then we'll do begin install. What I would recommend if you're going to try to follow along is do this inside a virtual machine first, and then once you understand how it works, then you can repeat this process on like a laptop, or if you have a Homelab that you're going to set this up on, then you can just reduplicate this there. So yeah, we've got our CoreOS ready to rock and roll. Let's go ahead and scale the display, and let's see if I snap that to the side, what happens. Cool. So you can see it's running. You can see our little resource monitor here, CPU usage. It's going to minimize that. And now let's bring up our terminal again. What we need to do now, since we're inside our CoreOS directory, we need to serve up the ignition file to the CoreOS install. And to do that, it's Python 3-m http.server. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter on that. To find our hard drive here, we're going to do ls block. And then that's going to list all of our disks here. I'm using a virtual machine, so ours is VDA, virtual disk A. So I'm going to go sudo CoreOS installer, install, and this is install 2 basically, dev VDA, and then we want ignition, URL, HTTP, and then I need to know the IP address of my host machine. IP ADDR. All right, so it's 192.168.86.236. So let me copy that. So we'll go ahead and clear out of that. Up arrow a few times to get back to our Python. We're still in our CoreOS directory, so it's fine. On the CoreOS virtual machine, we're going to type in that IP address, 10.168.86.236. And this is important. You have to do a colon and then specify this port number 8000 because that's what we're using. And then we want our CoreOS.ignition file. Since we're not using HTTPS, this is considered an insecure ignition. So definitely make sure you specify that. Press enter. And it's having an error fetching the file, right? The firewall is still on. All right, so now what we want to do, I'm just going to paste this in. Sudo systemctl stop firewall D. We could look at the status firewall D and go ahead and put in your password, and you can see it is active. Now we'll do a control C to get out of that, and now what we want to do is we want to stop it, and we're just going to do this temporarily long enough for the Fedora CoreOS to install. So I'll do a stop, we'll up arrow a couple times, do a status just to make sure that it is inactive. Now that we've checked the status as it is off, we'll go ahead and do another Python. Now we've got our temporary web server hosting up the ignition file. We're going to up arrow and press enter again. If you look back over in the terminal, you can see where the virtual machine has connected and it's getting the CoreOS ignition file. That's exactly what we want. And if you look over on the VM, you can see where it's downloading from your local network. It's 1.6 gigs out of a total 2.9. So CoreOS is installing. All right, install complete. You saw how fast that was, but now we want to make sure we go back onto our main machine, do a control C. That's going to cancel out our temporary web server there. We're going to up arrow again. We're going to check the status. It's still disabled. Control C out of that. So now we want to just arrow over here and go start, and then we'll up arrow a couple times, go back to status, and just make sure you do see your firewall is active again. And now that we've got that, we can Control C again, and we no longer need the IP address of our local host anymore, so we can close out of that. And now our CoreOS is ready to go ahead and shut down. Do a shutdown now on the install. If for whatever reason your VM is still trying to boot up from the ISO, you come into this I for information, the details, and you can go into boot options and just make sure that the CD-ROM is unselected and your disk is selected, and you can move it up and down in that list if you need to move the CD-ROM drive down so it picks the VDA first. That's how you'd fix that, and then hit apply, and that's good to go. So now what we want to do is we want to SSH core at in the IP address from your VM. So it's going to be 192.168.122.166. And when we try to do that and press enter, it's going to ask us, are we sure we want to connect? We're going to type yes. And you're going to see that we got a permission denied here, right? So now I'm going to show you how to fix that. This only applies to the Flatpak version of the Bitwarden application. We're going to bring up the Bitwarden application. We're going to go to settings. And we're going to go to app settings and enable the SSH agent. And then we can just close out of that. And I'll right click on the systray icon and exit. And then let's go back in. There's Bitwarden and there's our key. So I'll go ahead and minimize this. And I'm going to up arrow and I'm going to try it again. And we're still getting a permission denied, right? And we want to check our SSH agent. We're going to type in SSH-add-L. And you can see where it's got no identities. And this is because Bitwarden is expecting a .bitwarden locally on your machine. And since we're using the Flatpak version, we don't have that. So we're going to go ahead and make that directory. And then we need to make a symlink. And you can see here, this is because we're using the Flatpak version, right? It lives in .var app com.bitwarden.desktop. So we need to make a symlink from that Flatpak location to the new directory that we just created. That's where the SSH agent is looking to. So we're going to make that symlink. And then we want to make that change permanent. So we're going to do an export SSH auth sock. And then we're going to point to that location that we just did the symlink to. And then now if we do an SSH add-L, you can see we now have access to those keys, right? So now I can go ahead and up arrow. And you're going to see when we press enter on this, Bitwarden's going to pop up. We're just going to authorize that. And boom, we're in core at localhost. So now that we've SSH'd in, there's literally no reason for me to have this other screen open. I'm not going to power off the VM. I'm just going to press the X here. And you can see the VM's still running, right? If I shut this down, my SSH connection would end. Once you get this down on a VM and you've got this on a laptop, you don't really have to worry about this piece. But for the VM portion, just while you're learning what we're doing here, make sure you don't power off the VM. Otherwise, your SSH connection is going to end. It's going to be terminated. So just minimize that. And now we are in our CoreOS install. And now we can do a cat OS release just to make sure that this is our CoreOS and it's not our Silverblue install. It does say Fedora Linux version 44 CoreOS. So there you go. Plus your terminal is showing you you're at core on your CoreOS install. Okay, and if we do an IP address, I'm just going to grab the IP address of our CoreOS installation here. And then if we bring up our browser and we navigate out to our website that we declared in our CoreOS install, we can throw in our CoreOS IP address here and then port 3000, which is what AdGuard's running on. And you can see AdGuard is ready for us to set up. You know, set up your username, your password. I'm not going to do it because this is just demonstration purposes, but you can see that our CoreOS is running AdGuard. You can run a Mindtest server on this. You can have a different web server running. You can have multiple containers running at the same time. This was just a demonstration to show you that it does work. So now that we know that that works, what we could do is just exit on that and then shut down our VM. And now you can see our VM is shut down. And now you can take what you've learned here and you can install this on a laptop if you wanted to. And I will include a written guide with this because there is an additional step that you'll need. If you're going to put this on a laptop and you want to be able to close the lid, there's 4 lines that you need to add to that. It used to be a config file, but I'll include this to where it'll work with the quadlet that we just used. That way you can just copy and paste it into your butane file, and then when you convert the butane to an ignition, that gets captured automatically. And I'll include these butane files as I create them on the GitHub repo. And then that way they're just super easy to copy and paste. You can use what you need. And the cool thing about using Bitwarden is everything is encrypted end to end. So we're not going to have SSH files on our home directory that are exposed, the public and the private. Nothing gets generated in our dot files, right? The .ssh, completely empty. Everything lives inside the encrypted vault here. Just an added layer of security. Very cool. Hey, if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.